Most men live in tension. They push harder, chase faster, force outcomes that never seem to arrive. The more they grasp, the further things slip away. So, they assume the problem is effort. They assume they must want it more, move faster, prove themselves louder. But tension is rarely the answer. Often, it is the signal that something deeper is misaligned. What if the problem is not your ambition, but your impatience? What if the path to receiving is not frantic pursuit, but disciplined stillness? Lesson 1. The first principle behind the idea that everything will come to you is the quiet power of releasing control. Most men hear the phrase, "relax and it will come," and misunderstand it immediately. They assume it means doing nothing, waiting passively, abandoning effort. But history has already tested that illusion. Nothing valuable is built by passivity. The real meaning is far more demanding. It requires a man to act without gripping the outcome like a desperate hand closing around sand. Observe how most people pursue what they want. Their thoughts race ahead of their actions. They rehearse conversations that have not happened. They imagine victories that have not been earned. They fear losses that have not occurred. Their minds live in a future that does not yet exist, and the body becomes a servant to that anxiety. Tension appears in their voice. Impatience enters their decisions. They move faster, but with less clarity, and the strange result appears again and again. The more they try to control every variable, the more unstable their situation becomes. Why? Because control is often a disguise for fear. When a man believes that everything depends on his constant pressure, he reveals a quiet distrust in reality itself. He behaves as if life will collapse the moment he loosens his grip. But life has never worked that way. Seasons grow without supervision. Opportunities unfold through timing no man fully commands. Even the most disciplined effort requires space for events to align. This is where most people fail to understand restraint. Releasing control does not mean abandoning action. It means abandoning obsession. You still prepare, you still work, you still move toward what you seek, but internally, something changes. You stop wrestling with time. You stop demanding immediate confirmation that your effort is working. You stop checking every moment to see whether the result has appeared yet. This shift is subtle, but powerful. The man who constantly monitors results cannot think clearly. Every delay feels like a threat. Every obstacle feels like evidence of failure. His emotional stability becomes dependent on immediate feedback. In that condition, even small difficulties feel enormous. But the man who releases control of outcomes gains a strange advantage. His attention returns to the present task. Instead of measuring success every hour, he measures the quality of his actions. Instead of chasing reassurance, he refines his discipline. Instead of forcing doors open, he becomes the kind of man who is prepared when the door eventually moves. And something else begins to change. When pressure leaves the mind, perception becomes sharper. You start noticing opportunities that anxiety previously hid from you. You hear what others actually say instead of what you fear they mean. Your decisions slow down just enough to become precise. Control shrinks vision. Calm expands it. One sentence captures this entire principle. What you grip too tightly begins to escape. This is why the instruction sounds simple, but demands maturity. Relax. Everything will come to you. Not because the world rewards laziness, but because disciplined calm removes the noise that sabotages most men before their moment arrives. Lesson 2. The second principle behind the idea that everything will come to you is understanding why desperation quietly repels what you seek. Many men believe intensity will attract results. They believe the more visibly they want something, the more likely it is to arrive. But time has repeatedly exposed a different pattern. Desperation rarely attracts opportunity. It distorts judgment and pushes it away. Desperation is not simply wanting something strongly. It is needing the outcome in order to feel stable. That difference may appear small on the surface, but its consequences shape almost every decision a man makes. Consider how a desperate mind behaves. It scans every situation looking for confirmation. It tries to accelerate conversations. It presses for answers before the other person has finished thinking. It treats uncertainty like a threat that must be eliminated immediately. The result is predictable. What could have unfolded naturally becomes strained. You see it in negotiations, relationships, career decisions, and even daily conversations. A man who needs approval speaks differently from a man who can walk away. The words may sound similar, but the atmosphere around them is completely different. One carries pressure, the other carries space, and people respond to that difference immediately. Desperation communicates one message without saying it directly. It signals that the man speaking has already placed his balance in the hands of the outcome. If the result fails to appear, his composure collapses with it. That silent message changes how others behave around him. They feel the pressure, even if they cannot explain why. This is why the instruction to relax is not about laziness. It is about removing the invisible tension that weakens your position. When a man is calm, something changes in his presence. His decisions are slower, but more deliberate. He listens longer before responding. He does not rush to secure agreement because he understands that time often reveals more information than urgency ever will. And this composure creates a quiet form of authority. People trust the man who does not appear threatened by uncertainty. They feel less resistance around him. Conversations remain open instead of defensive. Opportunities that would close under pressure remain available longer. But desperation closes doors before they even move. Look carefully at the moments where people lose control. It rarely happens during success. It happens when they believe something must happen immediately. The mind tightens, the voice sharpens, and judgment becomes narrow. Relaxing interrupts that pattern. It reminds you that outcomes develop through layers of timing, not force. Your role is to prepare yourself, observe carefully, and act when the moment becomes clear. Pressing harder rarely accelerates the right opportunity. Often, it simply exposes impatience. One sentence captures the entire principle. Need weakens position. The man who can remain steady while waiting possesses something rare, not because he refuses to act, but because he refuses to panic. And that restraint allows events to approach him without resistance, instead of being pushed away by the noise of urgency. Lesson 3. The third principle behind the idea that everything will come to you is the discipline of emotional neutrality. Most men believe progress requires strong emotional intensity. They assume that excitement fuels effort, and frustration fuels persistence. For short bursts, that may appear true, but over time, emotional turbulence quietly erodes judgment. Emotional neutrality is not the absence of feeling. It is the refusal to let feeling command direction. Observe how most people behave when they want something deeply. Their mood rises when signs appear and collapses when delays emerge. One encouraging message lifts their confidence. One obstacle creates doubt. Their internal state becomes tied to every small fluctuation around them. This is not strength. It is dependence. When your emotions swing with every signal, you surrender stability to events you cannot control. A delayed response becomes an insult. A temporary setback becomes evidence of failure. The mind begins interpreting noise as meaning. And once that cycle begins, clarity fades. Decisions made in emotional peaks are impulsive. Decisions made in emotional lows are defensive. Both distort perception. In that condition, a man does not act with precision. He reacts. Reaction is noisy. Precision is quiet. This is why disciplined men train themselves to hold a steady internal climate. Success does not intoxicate them. Obstacles do not break their composure. They remain present with the situation rather than drowning in their interpretation of it. Why does this matter for receiving what you want? Because emotional neutrality protects timing. When excitement dominates the mind, people rush. They speak too early. They reveal intentions before conditions are ready. They act before observing enough information. And often, the opportunity collapses not because it was impossible, but because impatience disrupted its natural development. But the neutral mind waits without tension. It studies the situation instead of projecting fears onto it. It notices patterns others ignore because they are too emotionally invested to see clearly. When the moment for action appears, the neutral man moves with calm certainty rather than emotional urgency. This difference is subtle but powerful. Think of the hunter who fires too quickly. The moment he hears movement, his excitement betrays him. The careful hunter waits until the shape becomes clear before releasing the arrow. One is controlled by impulse. The other is guided by awareness. Life operates in a similar rhythm. Opportunities rarely announce themselves loudly. They emerge quietly through timing, preparation, and awareness. If your internal state is unstable, you will either miss them entirely or disturb them by moving too soon. Emotional neutrality preserves alignment between observation and action. One sentence holds the core of this discipline. Control the climate inside you. The man who maintains that control does not chase outcomes with frantic emotion. He moves through events with steady perception. And that steadiness allows opportunities to arrive without being disrupted by the noise of reaction. Lesson 4. The fourth principle behind the idea that everything will come to you is understanding the difference between desire and attachment. Most men never separate these two forces, and because of that confusion, they spend years exhausting themselves. Desire is natural. It moves a man to build, to improve, to pursue something meaningful. Without desire, life becomes passive and directionless. But attachment is something different. Attachment is the moment desire stops guiding action and begins controlling identity. A man with desire says, "I will pursue this." A man with attachment says, "I must have this." At first, the difference seems small. Yet, the psychological consequences are enormous. When desire guides you, effort remains clear and disciplined. You work, you prepare, you move forward. But your stability does not collapse if progress slows. You adjust your approach, refine your actions, and continue. Attachment behaves differently. Once attachment forms, the mind begins clinging to a specific outcome as if life itself depends on it. The result becomes personal. Every obstacle feels like a rejection. Every delay feels like proof that something is wrong. The emotional weight of the goal becomes heavier than the work itself. And that weight begins to distort everything. Attached men rush conversations. They pressure decisions. They chase reassurance. Instead of building their position quietly, they attempt to secure the result prematurely. What might have developed naturally becomes strained by their urgency. This is why the instruction to relax is not about lowering ambition. It is about removing the invisible chains of attachment. Relaxation here means the man still desires the outcome, but he refuses to let the outcome dominate his internal state. His effort continues, his preparation remains sharp, but the result no longer owns his peace. That inner shift changes behavior immediately. When attachment fades, patience returns. Observation becomes sharper. Instead of forcing progress at every moment, the man allows situations to unfold long enough for their true structure to appear. And in that space, opportunities often reveal themselves more clearly. Consider negotiations, relationships, and career decisions. The person who must secure the outcome quickly is the one with the weakest position. Everyone senses it. They feel the pressure behind his words. But the man who desires something without needing it carries a quiet advantage. He listens longer. He moves slower. He can walk away when conditions are wrong. That freedom alone alters the balance of every interaction. People often assume that wanting something less strongly will weaken their chances of obtaining it. Yet, experience shows the opposite. When attachment disappears, clarity returns. Actions become precise instead of frantic. One sentence captures this entire principle. Desire directs. Attachment enslaves. When a man learns to hold desire without becoming possessed by it, his effort becomes calmer, his timing becomes sharper, and the path toward what he seeks begins to unfold with far less resistance. Lesson 5. The fifth principle behind the idea that everything will come to you is understanding that patience is a form of authority. Most people interpret patience as weakness. They imagine it as passive waiting, as hesitation, as a lack of courage to move forward. But history has repeatedly shown the opposite pattern. The impatient man is rarely the one in control. Impatience reveals something immediately. It exposes the belief that time is working against you. When a man feels that pressure, he begins accelerating everything around him. Conversations become hurried. Decisions become compressed. Silence becomes uncomfortable. He pushes for answers, pushes for results, pushes for movement. The mind convinces him that faster action equals progress. But speed without alignment rarely produces stability. Impatience narrows vision. It reduces a complex situation to one question. How quickly can this happen? When that becomes the central focus, a man stops studying the deeper structure of what he is dealing with. He sees only the destination, not the terrain, and this is where many opportunities quietly collapse. Because the world does not move according to personal urgency, circumstances develop through layers of timing that no single individual fully controls. When a man attempts to force events before those layers are ready, he often disrupts the very process that would have eventually benefited him. Patience prevents that disruption. But patience is not inactivity, it is disciplined restraint. The patient man still prepares. He still observes carefully. He still positions himself where opportunity may appear. What he refuses to do is panic when results are not immediate. This restraint creates a strange effect on other people. When someone speaks without rushing, listens without interrupting, and allows silence to remain in the room without discomfort, others begin adjusting around that calm presence. The emotional tempo of the situation slows down. Conversations become clearer. Information appears that would have been hidden inside rushed dialogue. Patience changes the rhythm of interaction. In negotiations, the patient man rarely reveals his position too early. In relationships, he does not chase reassurance after every silence. In professional situations, he does not react to every small fluctuation as if it demands immediate correction. Instead, he studies the direction of events over time. Why does this matter for receiving what you want? Because patience keeps the mind aligned with reality rather than imagination. Impatience reacts to what might happen. Patience responds to what is actually happening. That distinction protects judgment. A man who remains patient sees patterns forming long before others recognize them. He allows situations to mature before committing energy in the wrong direction. While others rush forward blindly, he moves only when the ground beneath him becomes firm. One sentence holds the center of this discipline. The calm man controls the clock. When you understand this, relaxing stops being a sign of passivity. It becomes evidence of authority. Not the loud authority that demands immediate obedience, but the quiet authority that refuses to be rushed by noise, pressure, or fear. Lesson 6. The sixth principle behind the idea that everything will come to you is understanding how silence strengthens your position. Most men underestimate silence because they believe influence requires constant expression. They assume authority is built through explanation, persuasion, and visible effort. Yet time has repeatedly revealed another pattern. The man who speaks less often sees more clearly. Noise creates confusion. Silence reveals structure. Observe how most conversations unfold. When people want something, they explain too much. They justify every intention. They attempt to fill every pause with more words. The silence between sentences makes them uncomfortable, so they rush to erase it. But every unnecessary word weakens position. When a man speaks continuously, he reveals his uncertainties, his expectations, and his pressure. Others begin reading his intentions long before he understands theirs. The more he explains, the more predictable he becomes. Silence interrupts this pattern. When you allow space to remain after a statement, something unusual happens. The other person begins filling that space themselves. They reveal information, opinions, and intentions that would have remained hidden if you had rushed to speak again. Silence invites exposure without confrontation. Many people cannot tolerate that exposure, so they rush to fill the silence with explanations that reveal more than they intended. The disciplined man understands this dynamic. He does not use silence as a trick. He uses it as clarity. Instead of reacting immediately, he allows the moment to breathe. Instead of interrupting, he studies tone, hesitation, and subtle shifts in behavior. Often, these small signals reveal far more than direct answers ever could. This habit transforms perception. Silence allows the mind to observe rather than perform. When you stop trying to control every moment of conversation, you begin noticing patterns others miss. You see who is calm and who is restless. You hear confidence and insecurity in the rhythm of speech. Most importantly, silence protects emotional discipline. When men speak too quickly, they often reveal irritation, fear, or impatience. Words escape before judgment catches them. A single, unnecessary sentence can damage a position that took months to build. Silence prevents that leakage. It also changes how others perceive you. The person who pauses before responding appears more grounded. His words carry weight because they arrive deliberately rather than impulsively. Others listen more carefully because they sense that what he says is chosen, not spilled. And this composure alters the balance of every interaction. People often reveal more around someone who is calm and quiet than around someone who dominates the conversation. They lower their guard because the silence feels non-threatening. Meanwhile, the silent observer gathers clarity that noisy participants never notice. One sentence holds this entire principle. Silence is control without effort. When a man understands this, relaxing becomes practical rather than abstract. He stops chasing control through constant activity. Instead, he allows space for situations to reveal themselves. And within that space, opportunities often move closer without being forced. Lesson 7. The seventh principle behind the idea that everything will come to you is understanding the hidden strength behind letting time work. Many men believe progress must always feel active. If nothing appears to be happening, they assume something is wrong. That assumption creates a dangerous habit. They begin interfering with processes that simply require time. Not every movement in life is visible. Some outcomes develop quietly beneath the surface long before they become obvious. A reputation forms slowly through repeated behavior. Trust grows through consistent presence. Opportunities appear after patterns become visible to the right people. None of these things respond well to pressure, yet impatience convinces men to interfere. When results do not arrive quickly, they change direction too soon. They abandon efforts that were beginning to gain traction. They try to accelerate recognition by speaking louder, pushing harder, demanding acknowledgement. But these reactions often interrupt the natural rhythm that was already working in their favor. Time is not passive, it is structural. It organizes cause and consequence. It allows patterns to become visible. It filters noise from signal. When you act with discipline and then allow time to process the results, you give reality the space it needs to respond. Most people never allow that space. They check constantly for signs of progress. They interpret every silence as failure. The moment discomfort appears, they move again. Their actions become scattered because they cannot tolerate the quiet period between effort and outcome. But that quiet period is where alignment happens. Think of planting a seed. Once the seed enters the soil, no visible change appears immediately. Days pass. The surface looks the same. If someone were impatient, they might dig the seed up repeatedly to see if it has grown. Each time they do this, they damage the very process they are trying to accelerate. Life follows a similar pattern. After disciplined action, there is often a period where nothing seems to move. That moment tests maturity. The restless mind wants to intervene, adjust, push harder. But the disciplined mind understands that some processes must unfold without interference. Allowing time to work is not surrender. It is trust in the structure of cause and consequence. The man who understands this continues refining himself while the process develops. He does not abandon effort, but he stops demanding immediate confirmation that the effort is working. His attention returns to preparation rather than impatience. And during that quiet stretch, something subtle occurs. Circumstances begin shifting outside his direct view. People observe his consistency. Situations evolve. Conditions align slowly. When the moment finally arrives, it often appears sudden to everyone else. But the patient man recognizes it. One sentence holds this principle: time reveals what pressure cannot. When you relax into disciplined patience, you stop disturbing the processes that require space to mature. And in that space, the results you once chased often begin moving toward you without resistance. Lesson 8. The eighth principle behind the idea that everything will come to you is understanding why calm men attract opportunities. Most people assume opportunities are purely external events. They imagine them as rare chances that appear randomly, like luck striking without warning. But when you observe carefully, another pattern emerges. Opportunity often moves toward the man whose internal state is stable. Instability repels responsibility. When a man is restless, impatient, or emotionally unpredictable, people hesitate to place trust in him. Even if his abilities are strong, his reactions introduce uncertainty. Others begin wondering how he will behave under pressure. Will he panic? Will he overreact? Will he abandon direction when difficulty appears? These questions quietly close doors. Calm, however, communicates something entirely different. It signals that the man standing in front of you is not easily disturbed by temporary conditions. His thinking remains structured even when the situation becomes complex. His reactions remain measured even when outcomes are uncertain. This stability is rare. Most people allow circumstances to dictate their emotional temperature. Good news excites them. Bad news destabilizes them. Their judgment rises and falls with external events. Because of this, others become cautious about involving them in decisions that require long-term steadiness. But calm men operate differently. Their presence creates a sense of reliability. When tension appears in the room, they do not rush to match it. When confusion spreads, they do not contribute to the noise. Instead, they slow the pace of the moment just enough for clarity to return. And people notice this immediately. When individuals search for someone to trust with responsibility, they instinctively move toward the person who appears grounded, not the loudest voice, not the most expressive personality, the steady one. Calm is interpreted as control. That perception alone begins attracting situations where stability is required. Leadership roles, difficult decisions, delicate negotiations, and long-term projects often gravitate toward individuals who demonstrate composure, not because they demanded the opportunity, but because others feel safer placing weight in their hands. This is how opportunity begins approaching instead of being chased. The calm man does not force his way into every situation. He prepares himself, observes quietly, and allows his reliability to become visible over time. When the moment arrives where someone must choose who can handle responsibility without collapsing under pressure, his name surfaces naturally. Meanwhile, the restless man continues chasing attention. He speaks louder, moves faster, pushes harder, believing that constant motion will increase his chances. But motion without stability often signals risk rather than strength. Those watching quietly prefer the man whose calm suggests he will not lose direction when circumstances become complicated. One sentence holds this principle: calm invites responsibility. When you relax internally, you do not become passive, you become dependable. And dependability quietly draws situations toward you that would never approach a mind ruled by tension. Lesson 9. The ninth principle behind the idea that everything will come to you is the practice of acting without inner pressure. Many men misunderstand relaxation because they confuse it with inactivity. They assume that if they remove pressure from the mind, their drive will disappear. But pressure and discipline are not the same force. Pressure is emotional noise. Discipline is structured movement. Look carefully at how pressure operates. When a man feels it internally, every action becomes heavy. He begins measuring each step against the outcome he wants. If progress is not immediately visible, frustration rises. His thoughts become crowded with questions. Is this working? Am I wasting time? Should I push harder? And time. The mind stops focusing on the task and starts interrogating the future. And that constant interrogation weakens performance. A musician who constantly wonders whether the audience will approve cannot concentrate on the music itself. A craftsman who fears every mistake loses the patience required to refine his work. A man who obsesses over results stops paying attention to the quality of his effort. Pressure pulls the mind away from the present moment where action actually occurs. Acting without inner pressure corrects this distortion. It brings attention back to the process rather than the reward. The disciplined man still knows what he wants, but he refuses to let the result dominate every movement. His focus becomes narrower and sharper. He does the work in front of him, nothing more, nothing less. This simplicity creates surprising strength. When pressure disappears, precision improves. The mind becomes quieter, which allows subtle mistakes to be noticed earlier. Decisions become deliberate rather than reactive. Instead of rushing through tasks in a desperate attempt to reach the outcome, the man begins refining the quality of each step, and quality compounds over time. Most people underestimate this. They believe success belongs to those who push hardest. Yet many failures occur because individuals pushed before their actions were refined enough to sustain the result. Pressure forced speed where patience was required. Acting without pressure avoids that trap. You continue moving forward, but the movement becomes measured. Each step strengthens the foundation beneath you rather than stretching your balance thinner. The work becomes steady instead of frantic. This steadiness creates endurance. A man driven by pressure burns energy quickly. His motivation rises and falls with emotional intensity. When results delay, fatigue appears. When obstacles emerge, frustration multiplies. Eventually, his drive weakens because it depended on emotional urgency rather than disciplined rhythm. But the man who acts without inner pressure moves differently. His effort is consistent because it is not tied to emotional spikes. He shows up whether progress is visible or not. He continues refining the process without demanding immediate reward. One sentence captures this principle: pressure distorts effort. Remove that distortion, and something changes. Your actions become cleaner, your judgment becomes sharper, and the work itself begins producing results that frantic effort could never achieve. Lesson 10. The final principle behind the idea that everything will come to you is what happens when a man stops forcing outcomes. Most people never reach this point because their habits are built around constant pressure. They believe every result must be pulled toward them through effort, persuasion, and control. If they are not pushing, they assume they are losing ground. But the man who learns restraint begins to notice something strange. Many outcomes were never resisting him in the first place. They were simply waiting for the right conditions. Forcing outcomes usually comes from one assumption: that events must obey your timeline. When reality moves slower than expected, frustration appears. The mind begins searching for ways to accelerate what cannot be accelerated. So people push harder. They send another message. They demand another answer. They attempt to speed up decisions that require reflection. They insert themselves into moments that would have unfolded naturally if left alone. And this pressure often produces the opposite of what they intended. Others feel cornered. Situations become tense. The natural rhythm of the process breaks under the weight of urgency. What might have arrived calmly begins to retreat. This is the quiet damage caused by forcing. The disciplined man eventually understands that effort and outcome belong to different domains. Effort belongs to him. Outcome belongs to time, circumstance, and the decisions of others. Confusing these domains creates endless tension. Separating them creates clarity. Once a man accepts that distinction, his behavior changes. He continues acting with precision, but he stops attempting to control what lies outside his reach. Conversations become calmer. Decisions become cleaner. His presence carries less pressure because he is no longer trying to bend every moment toward his expectation. And this calm alters the environment around him. People feel less resistance in his presence. Situations develop more naturally because they are not being forced into shape. The man himself becomes easier to trust because he is not attempting to dominate every outcome. Ironically, this is when many results finally appear. Not because he abandoned effort, but because he removed the tension that was interfering with the process. When urgency disappears, timing becomes visible. When pressure fades, opportunities remain open longer. The mind begins recognizing moments that were previously missed. What once looked like luck reveals itself as alignment. The man prepared himself. He acted with discipline. Then he allowed reality the space required to respond. When the moment arrived, he moved without hesitation because he was not exhausted by constant pressure. One sentence holds this final principle: do the work, release the grip. When a man reaches this state, relaxation stops being an instruction and becomes a condition. He no longer chases every outcome with restless energy. He builds, observes, and waits with composure. And within that composure, the things he once tried to force begin arriving on their own terms. If this way of thinking resonates with you, remain where discipline lives. Subscribe to the channel and stay close to this kind of silence. And leave a comment with a single sentence. Which of these rules do you struggle with the most: relaxing, patience, or releasing control? Say it plainly. Sometimes clarity begins with a quiet admission.